Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures in Anatomy and Physiology. I'm Professor Bob Long. We're covering the digestive system, and today we're going to be going over the tooth model. I'm going over several models of the teeth with you. I'm kind of zoomed in here so that you can see more detail. So, as you see here, this is one big tooth model, but we see all of the teeth lined up here in the two rings and two rows. Now, as children, we only have 20 teeth. We develop 20 teeth, which we call primary dentition, or our baby teeth. And then as we get older, those teeth start to fall out. The roots rot off, the teeth fall out. Not all of the roots rot off. Sometimes when you pull the tooth, there's still a root there. But essentially, those teeth fall out, and then we fill in with more teeth called the adult teeth or the secondary dentition. Now, the adult teeth, there are 32 of them. 28 of them are usually visible, and then the other 4 are buried beneath the gum line, okay? Or they're buried in the bone, and we call those the wisdom teeth. The wisdom teeth are called wisdom teeth because they come out when we're a little bit older and wiser. Now, before I go over the anatomy of the tooth itself, I want to go over the different shapes of teeth, how many you should have in the adult mouth, and what the functions of those teeth are. And we'll do a little bit of this for lecture as well, but I want to repeat that information. So I can see half of the mouth from front to back here. I can see all of it all the way around. Now these are the upper teeth. I can tell that because this is the uvula, and these are the lower teeth. Now, if I look at the teeth, they all come in different shapes and sizes. I'm going to move this model so it's not in the way. I'm going to just lay it flat here for a moment. All of our teeth have different shapes to them that allow us to identify the individual types of teeth. Okay. Now, the first tooth that I want to show you, this model here, is called an incisor. Incisors get their name from the word incision, which means a nice little slice. And these teeth can slice or chop things. If I look at them from an anterior view, the crown of the tooth is very straight across here. Almost, I wouldn't say flat, but it's straight across. If I look at it from a lateral view, though, it's rather wedge-shaped, almost like a hatchet. And when we chew, these teeth, 2 of them would come together and chop the food. There are choppers. We have 4 incisors. Actually, we have a total of 8. There's 4 incisors in the upper part of our jaw and 4 incisors in the lower part of our jaw. The 2 in the middle, that we would call our buck teeth on top, and the matching ones on the bottom, are called central incisors. The next 2 next to that would be called lateral incisors. After we get past the incisors, the next tooth starts to look rather pointy like this. This tooth is called a cuspid or a canine. Actually, this is the cuspid or canine. This one's called a bicuspid or a premolar. They look very similar in the sense that they have this large hump in the center of the crown of the tooth. So from an anterior view, they look very similar. But when I turn them laterally, I can see a huge distinction. From a lateral view, the cuspid, also called the canine, which would be our fangs essentially, looks similar to an incisor. The bicuspid looks like half of a canine and half of a molar. So, and one of the reasons we can see that is this little flat spot here. The canines are for tearing and slashing at food. You would bite into a hunk of meat or steak and rip it off. It's for like ripping flesh. The bicuspids or premolars are really kind of for crushing and cracking things. Like if you were going to bite onto a nut or something hard and crack it, this would help grip, and this would do a lot of the cracking or the crushing. Okay? They all have a single root, and they share that in common. Now I'm going to move the incisor and the canine out of the way. But let's look at them one last time from an anterior view. The incisor has a sort of linear edge to the crown. The canine and the bicuspid or premolar have that prominent ridge in the middle. But from a lateral view, I can also tell that this is a canine because it doesn't have this flat spot of a crown where the bicuspid does. Now the last tooth that we're going to look at, let me move these over, is called a molar. And everyone's familiar with molars. They're kind of the famous image of a tooth that everyone gets to see. Molars have multiple roots, 2 roots, sometimes 3 roots, and the crown is rather base shaped. It's rather flat shaped. I'll show you another one right here. Now this one actually has a cavity in it, and we'll look at that cavity in a minute. But you can see that they have multiple roots and they have kind of a flat crown. And these are for grinding food. So if you're eating salad, the occlusal surface, the surface where the 2 teeth touch, is called the occlusal surface. You could see how these would mash up and grind everything like a mortar and pestle, or what we call a molcajete in South Texas. So one of the things I do want to show you, if I break the tooth open, this one comes open, is that we can see that there's different materials that the tooth is made out of. The crown is covered with a very hardened material. This white outer covering is called enamel. Most of the body of the tooth and the roots are made up of a substance called dentin. Dentin is very similar to bone, except it doesn't have any cells in it. That's why when we start to damage the dentin, if you get a cavity, cavities are damage to the enamel, and bacteria can get in there and eat away the enamel. If the cavity has not gotten into the dentin, it's not a big deal. They can kind of grind it out and fill it in. Once it gets down into the dentin, it becomes a real problem, especially if it gets into what we call the pulp. The pulp has blood vessels and some nerves and some other flesh in here. And once the tooth starts to hurt, you're getting to the nerves, you really have to take care of that, because then the tooth can become infected and create major problems. And then there's another covering around the roots of the teeth called cementum. You can't really see it all very well here, but you can see some of these structures. Now, I'm going to move these models out of the way. There's one last thing I want to show you on this model, and this is the pulp, and if I remove the pulp, there would be an empty chamber there called the pulp cavity. This area where the blood vessels and nerves run is called the root canal, which is the name of a procedure. When this gets infected, they drill all the way through into the root canals and kill off the nerves and then fill it all in. The beauty of that is the tooth is dead, so it doesn't hurt anymore, but it's still functional, it's still there. Anyway, and at the very tip of the tooth are these little blood vessels and nerves coming in here, and they're going to enter through a hole called the apical foramen. Now, because this is so small, I'm going to bring this model back, and let me make sure that everything's within my field of view, because it's just me and a cell phone. So yeah, so here's all the stuff that I want you to see. If I were to go through these 2 models, actually there's one more model. Let me show you this one. This is the jawbone, and if I look from the front, this would be called the central incisor, this would be the lateral incisor, this would be the canine. I have 2 bicuspids, so there's a total of 8 bicuspids or premolars. There's a total of 4 canines. There's a total of 8 incisors. We have 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 2, 4, 6, and 8 from the upper and lower jaws of the bicuspids. We only have 4 fangs or 4 canines. These bicuspids are premolars. I only see 2 of the molars, but if I were to break this model open, the 3rd molar would be buried in the bone. That's what we call the wisdom teeth. And because of the angle here, they can come in at an awkward angle and press all your teeth together and mess up your teeth. So when they start coming in, very often they will impact the other teeth. They call them impacted molars, and they have to be removed surgically. You can also see where the mandibular foramen is here. I'm sorry, the mental foramen. And you can see some nerves coming out feeding the gingiva or gums. So on this model, let's review real quick. Central incisor, lateral incisor, canine, bicuspids or premolars, molars. There would be a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd molar. This is the gingiva or gums. And if I look at this angle, I can see the groove between the tooth and the gum called the gingival sulcus. That's where you would stick toothpicks and dental floss. And actually, some of these teeth are removable. And if I hold the jaw together here, you can see what's called the alveolus. An alveolus is an empty space, like the alveoli of the lungs, and the grooves here would be the alveolar processes that we learned when we learned the skull. Now, we're not going to cover that in here, but it's kind of cool to look at. All right? So, now, we've learned the different shapes of the teeth. For lecture, you should know how many there are of each tooth and what their functions are. Now, again, I want to go over this tooth model with you. Up here, I would have 2 central incisors, 2 lateral incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Central incisor, lateral incisor, canine or cuspid, bicuspids or premolars, and molars. Now, this is the part I want to focus in on now. Our tooth has 3 different areas. Now, first and foremost, you can see here the spongy bone of your mandible, and the teeth are embedded in that bone. Covering the bone is some soft tissue that we call the gingiva or gums. Gingivitis would be inflammation of your gums. And there's a little groove here between the gum and the tooth, or between the gingiva and the tooth, and that little groove is called the gingival sulcus. And food can get trapped in there. That's why people should floss their teeth. Now, the tooth itself has 3 regions of anatomy. Everything above the gum line is called the crown of the tooth. So if I asked you to identify this region, you would say crown. Everything at about gum line is referred to as the anatomical neck, or the neck of the tooth. And then everything buried in bone are called the roots. So if I ask you for this part of the tooth, that would be the root. This part of the tooth would be the crown. Our teeth are made up of several different substances. The hardest substance made by the human body is this white stuff that covers the crown of the tooth, called enamel. So if I ask you for the white layer, or this white covering, you would say enamel. All of this yellow looking layer here that has some little ridges in it is called dentin. And a majority of your tooth is made up of dentin, and it's a stuff similar to bone. But if you were to be eating something and accidentally bite on something hard like a rock or a piece of bone, you might fracture your tooth. Because there's no cells there, we couldn't repair the damage. So Mother Nature covered the crown with enamel to protect the bony part called dentin. Now, it's a little bit hard to see, but if you look at this model, you can see the dentin here, but then there's sort of a thin layer of this white outer covering. And while it looks like it's the same as the enamel, chemically it is not. It's a different substance called cementum. So this outer covering out here is called cementum. I can see a little bit of cementum here. So I have enamel, dentin, and cementum. The tooth is held into the mandible by all these little tiny red looking lines running across here. I don't know how well you can see that, but these little dark maroon looking lines are called periodontal ligaments. Periodontal ligament. And those ligaments help hold the teeth to your mandible and to the upper jaw. Now, one of the things that we often are told when we're kids is don't open bottles and open things with your teeth. And that's true. There's 2 reasons. You could chip up the enamel, inviting infections, or you loosen the periodontal ligaments and your teeth can fall out sooner. So don't do that. Now, in the middle of the tooth, this area is called the pulp cavity. This space in here, it's filled with pulp material. And then this channel running through here is called the root canal. And then at the very tip of the root would be an opening called an apical foramen. Apex and apical refers to a tip, and foramen means a hole. And that apical foramen is where these blood vessels and nerves enter into the tooth, run through the root canal, and then fill the pulp, which provides sensitivity for our teeth. So you should be able to make out the different types of teeth on all the models that I've shown you. You should be able to make out the gingiva and the gingival sulcus, the groove here. You should be able to make out the crown. Can't really see the neck very well, but it would be here. But you should be able to determine what the root is. The covering here would be enamel. The yellow layer here would be dentin. And then this layer here and here would be cementum. And I have the periodontal ligaments, the root canal with the pulp cavity, and the apical foramen, the hole at the tip of the root. So, I don't know if that was the smoothest video or not, but I hope that you learned something from all of these models. I hope you had as much fun as I did going over them. Now, go over them until you can't stand it. Download the pictures from my class, from the lab, and start practicing labeling these things. Do it till you can't stand it. Do it till you understand it, and then do it till you can teach it to someone else without looking at your notes. All right, hope you had as much fun as I did. See you on the next video.